Hi everyone, my name is Breanne Nicole. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 18 months old, and today I am so excited because I did connect with Danielle, who is a registered dietitian and also somebody who's diabetic.
So, like Breanne said, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 16 years old, so a little later than you. But I am also working as a registered dietitian, and I focus on helping people with all types of diabetes.
So today, Danielle and myself, we did want to go over the topic of really shutting down diabetes stigma because so much goes into it. I don't know about you all, but at least for me, there's so much on social media that's just portrayed not accurate when it comes to diabetes alone. So I first want to start off by what we see on television, what we see on Instagram, what we see on commercials. And at least for me, when I hear or see like diabetes, you always see somebody who may be in maybe a bigger body, who might be
Mhm.
elder, maybe somebody eating sweets and candy. And I think a lot of times, like all of that correlates with diabetes, and it's just so wrong the way I feel like media portrays diabetes.
Absolutely. And it like sends that message to people that don't know what diabetes is, that sugar causes diabetes, that only people in a larger body would get diabetes. It just sends this message that normalizes for people that don't experience or don't have diabetes, that it was something that the person could have changed, you
Yeah.
know? And it's really, really tough because just like you said, aside from TV, it's like when we're on social media, we're scrolling through. I've seen memes, I've seen, fitness accounts make funny jokes like I'm eating my diabetes today. And it's like, we really have to start targeting some of these like ways that people explain what diabetes is because it's not doing justice to all the hard work that it takes to actually manage this disease.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. Like, even when I tell somebody, oh, yeah, like I'm type 1 diabetic, they'll literally look at me and be like, you are? You don't look overweight. Or I couldn't tell. I'm like, well, yeah, because diabetes isn't that. Like, my pancreas literally shut down on me when I was 18 months old. Like, it wasn't because
Hmm.
I ate too much sugar. It wasn't like my mom and dad were feeding me bottles of sugar with milk. I just
Right.
was like a normal kid. And I think a lot of the times people correlate diabetes and sugar. Like you have, that sugar disease or it's the
Hmm.
lifestyle.
Hmm.
And like I think there's just when it comes down to it, just not much education around diabetes as a whole. I think
Hmm.
a lot of the times people just kind of put diabetes in one category. I wish,
Yeah.
like, type 1 diabetes could just have a totally different name, like completely. Just because
Yeah.
there's different types of diabetes as well.
There's so many different types of diabetes that, a lot of people don't even know about outside of type 1 and type 2. There's type 3C, there's LEDA, also known as type 1.5, there's MODI, there's various types of diabetes. And like when people have this idea that sugar causes diabetes, what they're really not understanding is diabetes is a very complex condition, and, we're looking at maybe like type 1 or type 2. So with type 1, our pancreases have shut down. It is no longer producing that insulin that helps to bring in that glucose into the cells for energy. So anytime somebody with type 1 is eating, that carb that breaks down into glucose, which is its purpose, that's why we eat carbs for energy, doesn't get into the cells, and so it leaves that blood sugar to keep rising. And so with someone with type 1, they need to take injections. When we're looking at like type 2, there's an insulin resistance, so their pancreas is making insulin, but it's not being used efficiently. So sometimes they need something like an oral medication to kind of help with that resistance and help get that glucose into the cells. So it has nothing to do with eating sugar. Otherwise, wouldn't everyone have diabetes?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's such a good point. No, that's so true. Exactly. And as a dietitian, do you get a lot of clients where they ask, like, oh, can I eat this? Or should I stay away from sugar? And are they so focused on that, what we see on social media where it's like you can't eat carbs or you can't eat this.
Mhm.
Or a lot of the times you see, you can't. And just kind of from
Mhm.
your perspective, like, what do you see from clients and what do you recommend them?
Yeah, I mean, usually what I tend to see is a lot of frustration with the diagnosis and the frustration of feeling like, well, great, now I can't have all these things that I like to eat. And well, great, now I have to eat low carb, I have to have keto bread. And I think some of the misunderstanding there is that while you may have diabetes, whether it's type 1, type 2, type 3C, whichever type of diabetes you may have. It doesn't mean that you have to cut out food groups. It more so means what are the interventions you're going to take to be able to manage your blood sugar, whether it's your insulin, like with type 1, we absolutely need that, right? It's just not going to work if we eat carbs and don't take insulin. But for all other types of diabetes too, it's like there's many ways of managing your blood sugar that have nothing to do with the food you're eating. So, sorry if that's like a whole big spiel, but I really just feel like when I work with clients, I try to discuss with them ways that we can add things into their diet versus remove. Because a lot of times, this deprivation of foods that you want to eat, like carbs, can lead to binging or it can lead to disordered eating patterns. And if you're somebody that's been diagnosed and already struggled with an eating disorder, this can feel like such a hard diagnosis because you've just unlearned all the tracking, all the numbers, that fixation. And now the information that we get is we'll count the numbers, weigh the food, cut the foods out. So I think as a whole, we have to do better with giving people tools because usually at first assessment, people feel so overwhelmed.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for just explaining that as a whole. It's just so helpful. Especially hearing it again, like I feel like your perspective on everything is just so interesting because not only are you diabetic, you're also a registered dietitian. So as a whole, I just find that just incredibly helpful, that type of
Mm,
information. Because you're so
thank you.
right. We're always like we're hearing like we need to remove this and we need to remove that. And it's like from your
Mhm,
perspective, like, no, like what can I add?
mhm,
Me as a type 1 diabetic, like I'm Italian, I enjoy
mhm,
pasta, I enjoy bread, like
mhm,
I enjoy food.
mm,
And, to tell somebody like you can't enjoy this, it totally could definitely play a toll on you mentally as well, especially with diabetes and especially being newly diagnosed. So since I was diagnosed at 18 months old, this is really just the only lifestyle I know. And my mom always told me like her goal was to make sure I live a normal lifestyle. So thankfully,
mm,
she never removed those different types of food groups
mm.
for me.
I love
Where like
that.
it was time for snack, like okay, me, my brother and sister will have snack, we'll have chips. Like we need carbs again, like what you said for
Mhm,
energy, but also for our blood sugars as well. If we don't eat
mhm,
carbs, we're good. Our blood sugars are going to go
mhm,
low, and
mhm.
we need
Oh, yeah.
as a diabetic or has anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely vital and something I like to discuss with clients that always just like boggles their minds because again of this repeated message that we're getting about carbohydrates. But so carbs are our brain's primary fuel source, and the minimum recommended daily allowance for carbohydrates minimum is 130 grams a day. So that's equivalent to about like 7 slices of bread. And that's not to say that, okay, go eat 7 slices of bread, but it's to give you that visual that your body requires much more than you think it does. And I totally understand that for some people with diabetes, eating lower carb has felt safer. It has felt like, I don't have to think so much about how much insulin I need to take. But I think there's a fine line where it becomes more disordered and there's a lack of consistent fuel for your body. So, I mean, I know I've definitely had people come at me in like my comments and things like that, like keto is the way to go, low carb is the way to go. And my response to that is you know what, if this is something that you think is sustainable, that you don't need to have these cheat days, which essentially are planned binges, and it's not affecting your personal life and your emotional health, go for it. That sounds like it's a good fit for you. That was not a good fit for me. I had already struggled with, binge eating prior to my diagnosis of diabetes. And when I cut carbs out and I opted for diet ice cream, sugar free everything, all I could think about were the foods that were, carbs, just the regular version of it. So yeah, I totally lost track of what your question was because of talking so passionately about carbs, but
Honestly,
I
I
just
forgot too, and I'm just so focused on what you're saying that it's totally fine.
yeah. Yeah, so I just really want to encourage people if they, they're listening and they feel like there's no way that I could have carbs in my diet. It's like absolutely you can. And some of the best ways of managing your blood sugar is consistent eating. So, kind of like what you were talking about, if you're not getting enough of those carbs and your blood sugar is starting to taper down, yeah, what's going to happen? You're going to need to have some juice. You're going to have to bring your blood sugar back up, and then it goes high, and then you have to bring it back down. It just starts this like roller coaster blood sugar feel versus, if you were to start your day with your breakfast, your blood sugar will increase because that's what everyone's body does. And you take your insulin and it'll start tapering off after, like the 2 hours post meal is usually when it's supposed to be coming back into range. And if we don't eat until, 4 or 5 hours later, it's just going lower and lower. So adding in the snacks, adding in the meals that are consistent, super helpful.
I don't know if you ever heard of people saying, or even asking you, like, do you have the bad kind of diabetes? And kind of like that hierarchy, where in my opinion, like, they all suck. Like, and also too, like, there's no good kind of diabetes either. So kind of what
Yeah.
are your thoughts on that? And if anybody ever asked you that before.
Oh, yeah. This is honestly, I feel like this is like a huge problem in the type 1 community. Like, don't get me wrong, I love my fellow type 1s, but I do feel there's kind of like, oh, well, we didn't cause our diabetes, my pancreas doesn't work. And yes, just like you said, all forms of diabetes suck. All forms of diabetes are really complicated, in the way that it started. The different factors that can cause diabetes can range from genetics being a, very huge component, um, family history, race, ethnicity, age, long-term steroid use or different medications, having something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, which increases insulin resistance, having hypothyroidism increase your chance of diabetes. There's so many factors at play that to say that type 1 is the good kind and type 2 is bad doesn't give credit to the fact that there's so many things at play with type 2 as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely. I couldn't agree more. For anybody newly diagnosed, what would you recommend somebody, or maybe somebody who's maybe struggling with their A1C? What would you
Mm.
recommend?
Starting points. So this is so hard. I think it's going to be different for each person. Like there's a lot of nuance in the type of person and where their relationship with food is at. But I would highly suggest looking to find someone that is a diabetes educator. And if you've struggled with your relationship with food, even looking for a dietitian that specializes in intuitive eating, because that is going to focus more on the relationship factor. So, that's probably first step is kind of assessing where are you at mentally with all this, because diabetes is tough and the diagnosis is overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then step two, I would just highly suggest finding ways to incorporate carbs with your protein sources, fat sources, and adding in a fiber. Because by doing something like that, you're allowing, so with like fat, it delays gastric emptying, which keeps you full for longer. And then with protein, it curbs that blood sugar spike. And fiber, the same, it breaks down slower. So when you're having those with your carb source, you're allowing those to slow down that carb breakdown. So that'd be like a really great place to start where you're not eliminating things. Definitely trying to be, in contact with your endocrinologist for ways that you can change things, but keeping in mind that your mental health is just as important as what it is that you're doing for your diabetes management.
Is there anything else that you want to bring up, like subject wise?
Oh man, there's so many things.
I
Um,
know.
where to even begin? I think, just to kind of bring up this kind of guilt and shame that people feel about this process of eating normally, of giving yourself the experience of having the regular carbs. Because something I find, even with like the clients that I see, is like maybe prior to working together, they have been super low carb. And then there's like a birthday that comes up, and there's this feeling of like, great, what am I supposed to do? Like, there's no way I can eat this cake. There's no way I could enjoy this meal. So I just want to reassure you that it's absolutely okay to have the foods that are not low carb, and to have the cake, to have the ice cream, because food is more than just fuel. It's celebration, it's joy, it's cultural, it's just gives so much more meaning than just basing off like what your blood sugar is going to go to. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I just want to like reassure people that hope is not lost. You can definitely find this peaceful relationship.
Yeah. I think so many times when we hear like diabetes, food, the lifestyle
Mhm,
choices we make, such as what we're
mhm,
eating, how much sugar,
mhm,
how much
mhm.
carbs. So we're all focused on those numbers and exactly what we're eating. Blood sugar spikes
Yeah.
play a bigger role, and there's so much more to the blood sugar spikes. So no, yeah, definitely. I'm
Yes, yes. Yeah. So it's like if we can take a step outside, and this is something I do practice with my clients. So, there is that kind of stress that happens when you look at your blood sugar. You see those arrows going up on your pump or your meter, you see it's higher than you thought it would be. And it's really like, can we take a step back and think about what other factors could be at play? Like, as far as environmental factors, I'm even thinking about like hot weather, cold weather.
oh,
Getting a sunburn can increase your blood sugar.
I didn't
Getting
know that.
sick, yeah, getting sick definitely increases your blood sugar. Getting an injury, um, headaches, like migraines, there's lots and lots of factors that we don't necessarily hear about. Maybe I can send you a link that you could put in like your notes for the
Yeah.
YouTube episode, because there's this one person with diabetes that came up with the 42 factors and put it into different areas like environmental, biological, medication. And I love that because it totally removes you from that like zoned in view that, okay, well, apparently I can't eat bagels anymore, It's
Yeah.
like, what else? What else is at play? And let's say maybe it was more so related to the food. Instead of being harsh on yourself, can you ask yourself, like, okay, what can I do differently next time? And just because my blood sugar is high doesn't mean that I failed. It just is giving me data to understand my body better and to know what to do differently next time.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. No, I'm really excited. I'm actually looking forward to looking at the link.
Yeah, yeah, it's great.
Back to that. So, like, hypothetically, like sunburn or hot weather, how does that, I guess, in our bodies, spike our blood sugar? Is it more of like a stress factor?
Yeah, I think I'd have to look more into the hotter weather one, but I follow this one person, totally random, like on TikTok, and she
Okay.
lives in like Iceland. And
Mhm.
she's always talking about like what happens when she goes outside because it's so cold, her
Yeah.
blood sugar will drop. So I think the opposite happens in like really, really hot weather. And I wonder too if it's also related to maybe some like dehydration, because when we're dehydrated, again, your blood sugar will start increasing, your kidneys are trying to filter. So I think there's multiple things in the body that happen with just that internal body temperature. I don't know the exact
Yeah.
mechanism, but I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, that really is. Cause like thinking about it, like anytime like I go in a jacuzzi, my blood sugars every time spike. Like doesn't matter
Me
what I'm
too.
looking for, going
Me
in
too.
the jacuzzi or whatever it is. I check my sites, that my blood sugar
Yep.
be perfect 100. Go in the jacuzzi, a half hour later, I'm like, where are these arrows coming from? What's going on?
Yes, exactly. Like I just for one of my friends like bachelorette parties, we went to this like day spa and it was so nice, so relaxing, but I had the same experience. It's like I literally didn't do anything. I was just breathing and relaxing. And I looked at my pump and I was like, what is going on? So, yeah, it's just another thing that we don't think about, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody that only has that perspective that food has caused this probably would think, oh, what did I eat? I probably shouldn't have done that. So it's just good to have like a bigger picture understanding that there are factors that are not necessarily in your control.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point because again, like when you hear diabetes, you just correlate it to food. Like that's it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's almost like again, like what we mentioned before, like we're blamed for it. Like you
Mm-hmm.
should have done X, Y, and Z or Y, X, Y, and Z. And I think diabetes, like not only is it exhausting physically, but in my opinion, also mentally as well.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, and like I think like self-care, I think is just so important in my opinion,
Mhm,
plays a huge role, especially even with my A1C, to be honest, like when I find myself stressing out about my blood sugars, so
mhm,
hyper
mhm.
focused on them. Yes, we should, of course be cautious, check on our blood
Huh.
sugars, but I think it comes to a point where it's like you don't want to obsess over them either, because then those stress factors, they're just going to start mounting and
You're like damned if you do, damned if you
yeah.
don't, right? Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with you. It's like when the fixation sets in, you're putting a lot of stress on your body to essentially be perfect.
Yeah,
And again, we have diabetes. It's hard, it's complicated, and we can't expect our numbers to be perfect all the time. But, some really great indicators, like especially with having a continuous glucose monitor, is having your time in range be over 70%. And again, it's not judgment if it's below, but again, it's data to help you.
yeah.
So we look at that as a good indicator. Or if you're just using a glucose meter, I think you can look at maybe like an average and just see, okay, how am I doing? Is there anything I can do differently? Do I notice that maybe I have not been bolusing enough at dinner, something like that. So just being more curious versus judgmental over your decisions around your blood sugars.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. It's very tough. I so agree with you about the mental health part of it. Honestly, I think every person should see a therapist, but that's probably another really good tip for a newly diagnosed diabetic
Yeah.
is seeking out therapy and, finding a way to kind of release some of that burden that's like in your mind because you're acting as an organ now, and that's really hard.
Yeah.
Very hard.
Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. Exactly kind of what you said. Like, it's also a lot of responsibility. And for me being diagnosed at 18 months old, I give so much credit for my parents because even though they
Mm,
don't have the disease, they're very close to having it because they are taking care of a child with diabetes.
mhm.
So I even think like
Yeah,
on parents, that can also take a mental toll. Maybe it
totally.
like if not more because not you're responsible for them. So like I could just see them maybe like playing like the blame game, like it's my fault or whatnot. And like I am
Mhm.
again just so grateful for everything my parents done as an adult
Yeah.
and looking back and like just for all the parents watching this, all you could do is the best you could. And as your
Mhm.
child gets older, like those times you say no to certain things, or like those times, like at least for me, like my parents would literally have to like chase me for a needle, hold me down. Like, gotta take her, get rid
Oh, I bet. I bet. Yeah.
of me. But like, I'm so
Mhm.
thankful they did that because that's what kept me going. Like, that's what
Mhm.
literally just like kept me alive.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I think that's so cool that like your parents were so supportive because yeah, it's so overwhelming for parents. But I feel like, I was diagnosed at 16, so while it was still really overwhelming,
Teenager.
I cannot imagine being 18 months and having a child that's 18 months with diabetes, because yeah, you want absolutely like the best for them. And so definitely, definitely, I think having the Dexcom app is like super great for parents now.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was even available when you were
No,
18
I
months.
was
So,
taking syringes and like 5 needles a day. And I also had to eat very strictly at the time because I'm getting insulin prior to myself eating. So I needed those carbs to make sure I didn't go low and I didn't have too much insulin in my body. So I remember
yeah.
I need a snack. In school,
Mhm.
I used to wear a watch and it'll start beeping in class. All right, gotta go. Gotta go eat my
Oh, yeah. So it's like technology has made things a lot easier, but I do like what you mentioned for parents. It's like it is really challenging, but being alongside with your kids
snack.
is the best support that you could give them. It's like taking the time to understand the disease, to understand maybe some of the nuances, and just provide that compassion versus that blame or shame, because that's already going on in our minds. Like we already have plenty of that. So we don't need additional outside feelings of that.
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy that we're talking about this again, just because I just want to put an end to like that stigma and just provide more education because that's really what it comes down to is lack of education. Like I know when
Yeah.
people ask me like, "Oh, can you eat that?" or, or this. I know there's no bad intention towards it whatsoever. It's just
Yeah.
lack of education. And, I'm so grateful that, we're doing this talk together and I'm learning even
Mhm.
just so much from you. Again, I was diagnosed at 18 months. I'm not a professional. Like, there's always so much to learn.
Oh
Technology
my gosh.
is constantly evolving, and there's so much more information out there. It's wild.
Yeah, I'm still learning too. I feel like I still continue to learn new things. And I think that's also an exciting part of it. It's like there's so many tools that we have now
Mhm.
and they continue to grow. So, um, we do have to kind of change the language. And like when people do ask those questions, like, do you have the good diabetes? Do you have the bad? I've kind of taken it as my opportunity to explain to them, like, my reasonings behind, or not reasonings, but it's like the facts
Yeah,
behind
yeah,
type 1, type 2. And I think a lot of times people are so receptive to it, like, wow, I had no idea. It's like, yeah, of course, you didn't have any idea because it's not talked about. So here's here's that tidbit of information, and now you are one person that knows a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, super happy I could be here today with you. And if you want to talk about more diabetes stigma, I could talk for days. So I'm always happy to come back.
Well, and Danielle, how can people reach you? Are you on Instagram? I know you have clients. If you could talk a little bit about that, like how people can connect with you.
Yeah, so I'm mainly on Instagram. So you can find me at Food Freedom Diabetes. And that's my website too, foodfreedomdiabetes.com. I currently have a group that's going to be launching in July. So if you're someone that likes the group environment, I have worked on creating modules like self-paced so you can learn different topics around diabetes management. It'll have Zoom sessions. So if that's something that interests you, go ahead and just reach out to me.
Awesome, that's so exciting. Well, I want to thank everyone for watching. If you think of any other questions, please feel free to comment them below. If this is your first time here, please click that subscribe button, like this video, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon.